The noon sun burned white over the desert. Copper Creek shimmered in the heat, a cluster of wooden shacks and false hopes built along a dry riverbed. Dust clung to every surface, known to boots, to bottles, to the faces of men who had long forgotten what mercy looked like. At the edge of town, the bell above the old courthouse tolled once, twice Nyan calling the townsfolk to gather. They came half curious, half hungry for spectacle. Today was an auction, not of land or cattle, but of debt, nyum, and of pride. Mara Hale stood in the center of the square, her wrists bare, her eyes sunburned from the glare. Her father or his old coat hung loose on her shoulders, never one of the few things she hadn't yet pawned. A man with a ledger stood beside her, voice loud and smooth like a preacher, was lie. Treat property of Mara Hale, unpaid debts, $75.40. Any man willing to settle it by coin or service takes possession of said obligation and any future earnings she can provide. The words rippled through the crowd. Laughter followed. She could taste the salt of her own sweat, feel the sting of humiliation carving its mark into her. The crowd wasn't cruel out of malice, only boredom. Out here, decency died quicker than crops. And then came Clint Voss. He stepped through the parting circle like a wolf into a pen. Black hat, red dust on his boots, a tooth of gold glinting when he smiled. "He'll take it," he said. "All of it." The crowd murmured, some with pity, most with delight. Voss flipped a silver coin high, let it catch the sun before landing in his palm. "Let's call it sport, he added, his eyes never leaving hers. The town clerk nodded, already dipping his pen in ink. Mara wanted to scream nutshum, but the words stayed trapped behind the knot of her throat. And then from the far edge of the square, a voice cut through the heat. Low, calm, heavy as thunder behind the hills. How much to make this stop? No heads turned. A man stood by the hitching post, Jonas Reddan. He was tall, weathered, coat frayed from years of sun and silence. His eyes were pale gray, like stormlight through smoke. A stranger to most, but not to Marshal Keaton, who watched him from the steps of his office with a wary frown. Jonas dropped a small leather pouch onto the platform. The dull thud of coins silenced the jeers. "Get $75, he said, "and keep the change." The clerk blinked. "Sir, no. It was not for her," Jonas said quietly. "It was for peace." Vossu's grin hardened. "You think she was worth that much, stranger?" Jonas stepped closer, the wind lifting the brim of his hat just enough to show the scar above his cheekbone. "More than you'll ever be." For a moment the square froze. No one breathed. Then Voss laughed, too loudly, and spat into the dust. "You just bought yourself a heap of trouble, mister. Wouldn't be my first." Marshal Keaton cleared his throat, ending the moment. "Transaction settled, he said. Everyone go home before pride kills someone again." The crowd began to disperse. Only dust and silence stayed behind. Mara didn't thank him, not yet. She stood rigid, still trembling with fury more than gratitude. "You had no right to do that," she said finally. "You didn't ask for one." He didn't look at her when he spoke. He was staring out across the street where Clint Voss leaned against a post, watching them both with a look that said this wasn't over. "You'll make an enemy of him," she warned. "Guess that makes two of us." He turned then, meeting her eyes. For the first time she noticed the exhaustion in him. Not weakness, but a quiet kind that comes from carrying ghosts too long. "I got a ranch a few miles west," he said. "You can stay till you find your footing." "I don't need charity." "Good. I ain't offering any." The afternoon bled into rust and gold. Mara rode beside Jonas on a borrowed mare, the town shrinking behind them into a mirage. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken questions. Who was he? Why had he stepped in? The desert stretched endless ahead, a rolling dunes, dry sage, the bones of cattle half buried in sand. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered. Jonas broke the quiet. "You from here?" Used to be. My father worked the copper veins before the mine dried up. He died owing more than he made." Jonas nodded like he already knew. Debt don't die easy in this country. Oh, a gust of wind tore across the plains, carrying the smell of rain and iron. When they reached his ranch, the sky was bruised with stormlight. The house stood lonely on a rise. Hewn timber gray, roof sagging slightly but sturdy. A fence circled the corral, and beyond that, the desert ran on forever. Jonas dismounted first, steady and deliberate. There was a well out back, barn to the left. You'll find supper on the stove if the wind ain't blown it cold. Oh, why help me? Oh, she asked again. He paused, hand on the reins. Because sometimes it's easier to save someone else than yourself. Then he walked inside. That night the storm broke. Mara sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind claw at the walls. Lightning flashed, you mean, for an instant. The world was nothing but white sand and shadows. On the table, a single lantern burned low, casting long, trembling shapes across the floor. She traced the rim of her tin cup, trying to remember the last time someone had shown her kindness without wanting something in return. Outside, the rain came sideways, fierce and cold. Between flashes, she saw the outline of Jonas through the window, standing under the porch, head bowed, as if talking to ghosts. When the thunder rolled, she caught sight of something farther off, a flicker of light in the direction of the old copper mine. Once, twice, and then gone. She leaned closer to the glass, unsure if her eyes deceived her. Someone out there, oh, she whispered. But the only answer was the moan of the wind through the chimney. Jonas came in, soaked to the bone, hat dripping. He placed his revolver on the table before speaking. Storm's rough. Stay inside. Don't go near the ridge. Oh, why? Oh, on one, because the mine was cursed ground. Things buried there should stay that way. She caught the flicker in his gaze, on fear, maybe guilt. You saw the light too. Oh, he didn't answer. Instead, he poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs, one for her, one for himself. They drank in silence, the storm raging outside. When the thunder faded, Mara crept to the window again. The lantern's glow near the mine was gone now, swallowed by the dark. But in the wet sand near the porch, she saw footprints that weren't theirs, new and fresh, leading away into the storm. She felt a chill crawl through her chest. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled nearly long, lonely and accusing. And beneath the thunder, she thought she heard something else, the faint metallic echo of a hammer being cocked. She turned to speak, but Jonas had already gone to the door, his revolver drawn, eyes narrow. The storm swallowed them both. The night came with no stars, only wind. Jonas Reddan's lantern burned low, trembling in his hand as the storm clawed through Copper Creek. The air was thick with grit and fear. Somewhere behind him, the echo of a hammer clicking into place still hung in the dark. One inside, oh, he said, pushing Mara toward the porch. The woman hesitated only a second before obeying. He followed, closing the door against the screaming dust. The old cabin creaked like it might give in to the wind's anger. Silence returned, broken only by the rasp of Jonas's breath. You expecting someone? Omar asked. Jonas shook his head. Or not anymore. Whoa. He lifted the rifle, checked the rounds, then moved to the window. Beyond the storm, a faint red glow pulsed in the distance. One pouring a lantern, rising and falling like a heartbeat. That light, Omar whispered. It doors coming from the ridge. Jonas's jaw tightened. That ridge used to be a mine. They waited until dawn, when the dust thinned into ghostly strands. The desert lay still again, every rock and fence post washed in the pale, sorrowful light of morning. Jonas saddled the horse without a word. Mara followed, her eyes hard but curious. The trail to the ridge wound through cracked earth and scattered bones of mesquite. The red lantern still flickered, Neen impossibly steady, Neen above the collapsed shaft of Copper Ridge Mine. The mine's mouth yawned like something long dead, but not forgotten. Jonas dismounted. Stay here. Oh. Like hell, oh, Mara said, tightening her coat and stepping beside him. They descended into the ruin. The smell of rust and rot hit them at once. Old timbers moaned under their weight, the sound of a dying heartbeat deep within the earth. The lantern hung from a broken post, still glowing red, new, though its glass was blackened with soot. Beneath it, half buried in dust, lay a small metal box. Jonas crouched, opened it, nicked and froze. Inside were papers, sealed with red wax and stamped with the mark of Clint Voss. Across the top, written in a jagged hand, were the words Ledger of Blood. Names filled the pages, each line marked with a symbol, 9, some crossed out, others still clean. And beside one name, written years ago in faded ink, was Jonas Reddan. Mara Sharper's voice trembled, as he owns you too. Jonas closed the book, his face unreadable. Owned, past tense. Oh. The wind screamed again through the broken beams. Jonas Sasha's lantern threw wild shadows across the stone walls. Nuri, and that was when Mara saw it. A mark etched deep into the rock, almost identical to the scar running down Jonas's forearm, near 2 crossing lines inside a circle. She reached out, tracing it. Anashar, this say? What is it? Jonas looked away. Erwan Menorah's mark. Mine. Oh, he exhaled, long and tired. Years ago, I worked this shaft. We struck silver, and then gas. The blast buried 30 men alive, none including my wife. The company buried the truth with them. Clint bought the rights soon after, built his empire on their bones. Mara stared at him, her anger rising like fire. So when you paid my debt, Wanarawar, I paid for more than that, he said quietly. Jarjo, I paid for the past I helped make. The realization hit her like a bullet. The man who'd saved her was also part of the ruin that destroyed her kin. 9, and maybe, unknowingly, her father Rose's name was somewhere in that ledger too. She reached for the book, flipping pages until she found it. Hale, Thomas. Next to it, the same symbol 9 crossed out in black. Her hand trembled. My father died in that explosion. Jonas's eyes met hers. Then maybe I've been owing you longer than I knew. The sound of hooves shattered the moment. They turned toward the ridge's mouth. Dust rose in the distance. In 5 riders, black against the horizon. At their head, Clint Voss rode tall, his hat low and his grin wide. Well, I'll be damned, oh, he called. Didn't think you'd dig your own grave, Reddan. Jonas handed the ledger to Mara. Ride south, follow the creek, don't stop. Oh, well, I'm not leaving, not asking. Oh, he said. His voice was calm, like the space between thunder and strike. The first bullets whined through the air. Jonas dove behind a boulder, firing back with the precision of a man who'd lived too long to miss. Dust exploded, rock chipped. The smell of gunpowder clung like guilt. Mara crouched, watching him reload with steady hands. Then something hardened in her face. She tore her father's name from the ledger, shoved it into her coat, and grabbed Jonas's spare rifle. When she emerged from the dust, her voice was steel. You don't get to die alone, Reddan. Jonas smirked. Mamarura didn't plan to. Together they faced the riders. Numbered 2 figures half lost in the storm, standing against the tide of death. The fight was brutal, short, and close. Jonas moved like a ghost, every shot measured. Mara, less precise but fearless, caught one rider clean through the chest. The red lantern fell and shattered, flames licking the dry dust. The mine entrance glowed hellish orange. Clint's voice rose above the chaos. You think you can kill a debt, Reddan? Debts don't die, they collect. Jonas turned, blood running down his arm. Then collect this. Their guns spoke at the same time. Clint fell first, one the bullet carving through his throat. Jonas staggered, clutching his side, but stayed standing as the last echo of thunder faded into silence. When the smoke cleared, only the 2 of them remained. Mara helped him sit against the rocks. His breath came shallow, eyes fixed on the burning mine. It is over, oh, she whispered. Jonas shook his head weakly. No, not yet. He held out the ledger. Fire, burn it. Oh, Mara hesitated. The pages fluttered like trapped birds in her hands. So many names, so many debts that would never be repaid. Then she threw it into the flames. The fire roared, devouring the paper, the ink, the sins. Jonas smiled faintly. I guess the desert finally got its due. She stayed beside him until the last ember died. When she looked up, dawn had returned, near and soft, pink and merciless. Jonas's eyes were open, staring toward the light, but he no longer breathed. Mara rose, dust clinging to her like second skin. She took the spent shell casing from his pocket to the one marked RR Neener and pressed it into the ashes. Rest easy, old ghost, oh, she said. The ledger rose clean now. The sun rose over Copper Creek like a tired promise. For the first time in weeks, the town was quiet. Not the silence of fear, but the fragile hush that follows a storm too long delayed. Dust hung in the air like incense from some rough sermon the earth had preached overnight. Mara Hale stood at the edge of the road where the desert began. Her coat, too large for her shoulders, flapped in the morning wind. Jonas's coat. It still smelled faintly of cedar, gunpowder, and rain. The scent of a man who had carried his sins as faithfully as his rifle. Behind her, the smoldering remains of the Thorne estate marked the end of one reign and the uncertain birth of another. Sheriff Calder had ridden out before dawn with the last of Clintus' men in tow. The town watched from behind shutters, unsure whether to mourn or to pray. Mara didn't watch them. Her gaze was fixed eastward, where the horizon bled into sky. Copper Creek was breathing again, but not yet healed. At the saloon, the piano was gone, knee broken, burnt, or maybe just forgotten. Only a few regulars remained, talking low over coffee instead of whiskey. The laughter that once masked cruelty was gone. In its place lay the uneasy weight of reflection. Mrs. Dwyer, who had once jeered at Mara in the square, left a small parcel on the bar. Inside, a loaf of bread and a clean kerchief. No words, no apology. Just the gesture, awkward, human, trembling. Mara accepted it with a nod. She didn't know what forgiveness should look like. Perhaps it was this small, imperfect, and quiet. Outside, the wind lifted dust down Main Street, past the old post office, the shuttered blacksmith, and the gallows they'd dismantled the night before. Copper Creek was learning to bury more than bodies. By noon, Mara reached the hill above the creek. Jonas lay there now, under a marker carved from a wagon plank. Sheriff Calder had written the words himself, plain and unadorned. Jonas Reddan, he chose to stand. She placed a sprig of desert sage by the grave. The scent rose sharp and bittersweet. In the distance, thunder grumbled, not from storm clouds, but from dynamite far out by the old mine. Calder had promised to seal it off. Some doors, he said, didn't deserve to be opened again. Mara closed her eyes. She could still see Jonas in that final instant, his gray eyes clear, steady, not afraid. The bullet that felled Clint had also found him, and yet his expression had been almost peaceful, as if at last he'd found what he'd been chasing. Not justice, not redemption, but rest. She whispered, "You did save someone, Jonas. Maybe that's enough." A hawk circled above, calling once before it drifted toward the sun. Days blurred into weeks. Mara stayed though she could have left for Carson City or the rail towns to the north. Something held her here, in the stubborn soil of Copper Creek. She took over the abandoned livery, fixing roofs, trading feed, helping Calder keep order when tempers flared. The people grew used to her, if not yet comfortable. Kids began to wave at her. The preacher asked her to play the organ one Sunday, though she had not played in years. Her hands shook at first one, but when the first chord rang through the chapel, something loosened in her chest. Each note was an unspoken prayer, for Jonas, for herself, for all the broken things trying to live again. Sometimes at dusk, she saw a figure near the edge of town tall, coat billowing, watching. She knew it was only dust in memory, but she nodded anyway. The wind always answered. One evening, Calder brought her an old singed envelope. "A weren't found this in what's left of his place," he said. "Looks like it was meant for you." Inside was a note scrawled in Jonas's rough hand. "Mara, sometimes I think we're all just trying to pay debts that can't be counted. But maybe freedom isn't about owing nothing. It's about choosing what's worth the cost. If you ever find peace in this place, then maybe that's the only justice that matters. Inni Jr." She read it twice. The ink faded, the corners brittle. The next morning, she rode out beyond the creek and buried the letter beneath a lone mesquite tree. There was something sacred about returning words to the earth one, like letting them finally rest. Spring came, almost reluctantly. The desert bloomed in thin, defiant color, none in cactus flowers and pale lavender, brushing against the bones of the land. Copper Creek began to laugh again. Children ran where gallows once stood. But Mara never forgot the sound of the revolver that ended the storm. Sometimes she woke before dawn, hearing it in her dreams, Niuan, that metallic breath before the world changes. On those mornings, she saddled her horse and rode out to the ridge. From there, she could see everything. The creek, the town, the grave, and beyond that, the endless desert, sure, a land both cruel and pure, where every sunrise felt like a question. One morning, she didn't stop at the ridge. She kept riding east. The air smelled of sage and new rain. Behind her, Copper Creek shimmered in the growing light, small but unbroken. At a crossroads of rock and wind, she turned once more toward the horizon, the same way Jonas once had. A whisper of his voice came back with the wind. Sometimes saving someone else is the only way left to save yourself. Mara smiled. Then I guess you did, Jonas. You really did. She nudged her horse forward, and together they rode into the rising sun. Not as fugitives, not as ghosts, but as survivors of their own story. The dust rose behind her hooves, golden in the morning light, like ash becoming light again. Weeks later, a traveler stopped at Copper Creek. He noticed the rebuilt saloon, the laughter in the street, the hill marked by a lone wooden cross. When he asked who Jonas Reddan was, the barkeep just said, "Man who taught this town the price of looking away." And when he asked about Mara Hale, she only smiled. She left with the dawn, but every sunrise since then has been brighter.